drive a car for 100,000 miles, the brake pads are going to wear down.
Right, inevitably.
Yeah, the engine belts get brittle from constant heat and friction, and eventually, things just snap from overuse.
That's just basic physics.
Exactly. And it is completely intuitive to assume that the human body operates on those exact same physical principles. You reach your 60s or 70s and you figure, well, your biological shock absorbers are just worn out from decades of walking, lifting, and just living.
It's a very common assumption.
It really is. But the clinical texts you provided for today's deep dive reveal a reality that is entirely backward to that mechanical intuition.
Completely backward.
Yeah. The human body does not wear out from use. It degrades from disuse.
Yeah.
So today, we are looking at the specific biological mechanisms detailed in the research you sent over to understand exactly why taking it easy might actually be the most dangerous thing you can do for your musculoskeletal system.
It is a fundamental paradigm shift. When we look at the engineering of a bridge or a machine, structural integrity is this static property, right? It only deteriorates.
Right. It never magically rebuilds itself.
Exactly. But biological tissue, so we're talking muscle, bone, cartilage, tendons, it is highly dynamic. These tissues are locked in this constant, really delicate balancing act between breaking down and rebuilding.
Okay.
And the primary signal that tells your body to invest energy in the rebuilding phase is mechanical stress.
Mechanical stress, so like lifting or impact.
Yes. If you remove the stress by resting, the body assumes that the tissue is no longer necessary and it begins to dismantle it to conserve energy.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack this because that brings us to the first major condition outlined in the texts, and arguably the engine driving a lot of this age-related decline, which is sarcopenia.
Sarcopenia, yeah, it's a massive issue.
Yeah. The numbers you see in the general population are honestly sobering.
Yeah.
Between the ages of 60 and 80, the prevalence of sarcopenia, which, for those listening, is the severe loss of muscle mass and strength, it progresses from 15 to 32% for men and 23 to 36% for women.
And then it gets worse.
Right. It crosses this threshold after age 80, jumping to over 50% for both demographics, and over half the population.
The sheer scale of that is troubling, especially when you look at the longitudinal data. The text cites a Canadian study tracking over 4,500 adults aged 60 and older.
That's a huge sample size.
It is, and the researchers didn't just look at muscle volume.
Wow.
They tracked the direct correlation between that muscle loss and severe functional impairment.
Like what kind of impairment?
We're talking about the inability to rise from a chair without assistance, or a walking speed so slow that crossing a standard crosswalk before the light changes literally becomes a life-threatening hazard.
That is terrifying. Now, if I'm looking at those numbers, my immediate thought is simply that, well, these individuals retired, right? They stopped lifting heavy things, they stopped working, and the muscle just deflated from lack of use, like letting air out of a tire.
Right, that's the standard model of thinking.
But the biological mechanics detailed in the text showed this isn't just about the muscle fibers shrinking. The root cause is actually neurological. The muscle is decaying because the brain is losing its connection to it.
That is the most insidious part of sarcopenia. And it affects individuals who remain recreationally active, too.
Wait, really? Even if you're active?
Even if you're active. The mechanism the text focuses on is called motor unit remodeling. To understand this, we have to look at how a muscle actually fires. You don't just have a generic wire connecting your brain to your bicep.
Right.
You have distinct motor units. A single motor unit consists of one motor neuron, which is the nerve fiber originating in the spinal cord, and the specific cluster of individual muscle fibers it innervates or controls.
Okay, so a nerve and its little team of muscle fibers. And as we age, those specific motor neurons begin to die off.
They do. It is a process of denervation. The nerve path basically degrades, and suddenly that specific cluster of muscle fibers is left orphaned.
Orphaned?
Yeah, it receives no electrical impulse. And in human biology, a muscle fiber that receives no signal cannot survive. If it remains denervated, it will atrophy and undergo apoptosis.
Apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, right?
Exactly. It literally vanishes.
But the body attempts a rescue mission. I remember the text mentions that before those orphan fibers die, a neighboring surviving motor neuron can actually sprout new axonal branches and reinnervate them. The surviving nerve basically adopts the abandoned muscle fibers.
Yes, and this is where the remodeling occurs, and it fundamentally changes the performance of the human body.
How so?
Well, to understand the consequence, we have to look at the types of fibers involved. We generally have type 2 fast-twitch fibers, which are responsible for, explosive, high-force, rapid movement.
Or sprinting or jumping.
Exactly. And then we have type I slow twitch fibers, which produce lower force but are highly resistant to fatigue. They handle endurance.
Okay, so to use an analogy, it's like a corporate restructuring.
I like that, yeah.
You have the fast twitch department, the workers who handle heavy, rapid-fire tasks, and you have the slow twitch department, the steady, endurance-focused workers. As we age, the text indicates that it is specifically the fast twitch motor neurons that die off at a much higher rate.
Yes.
So the manager of the explosive department gets fired.
That is the crucial variable. The type 2 fast-twitch neurons are highly vulnerable to aging. So when those fast-twitch muscle fibers are orphaned, the neurons that sprout new branches to rescue them are almost always the surviving slow-twitch neurons.
The slow twitch manager adopts the fast twitch workers. And tell me if I'm getting this right. Those fast twitch workers can't keep doing explosive work because they are now receiving their orders from a slow twitch boss. The electrical signal dictates the function.
Precisely the case. The electrical impulse from a slow twitch neuron actually forces the biochemistry of those fast twitch fibers to change.
Wow. They get rewritten.
They literally transform to match their new nerve supply. This means the entire motor unit is remodeled. The muscle mass might theoretically be preserved by this rescue mission, but the functional output is permanently altered.
So they become slow.
Exactly. The newly remodeled unit produces less force, it fires much more slowly, and it has far less precise motor control.
This makes so much sense when you observe how aging physically manifests. It isn't just a loss of brute strength, it's a loss of velocity and correction.
Yes, reaction time.
Right. If an older individual trips on a rug, their ability to rapidly fire a leg outward to catch themselves relies entirely on those explosive type 2 fibers. If those fibers have been biologically rewired for slowness, the brain might send the signal to step, but the muscle simply cannot execute it fast enough.
And the text explicitly draws that line, noting that leg extensor power, the rapid explosive force of the quadriceps, correlates most significantly with fall prevention and independence.
Because it's the brakes.
Exactly. Once you lose the fast twitch capability, you lose the safety net of rapid biomechanical correction. You just can't catch yourself.
So we have a neurological decay causing a structural rewiring. But the texts also detail a massive chemical shift happening concurrently. The hormonal environment required to maintain muscle mass essentially crashes.
Yeah, we have to look at the cellular repair process here. Muscle tissue isn't static meat, it is constantly turning over.
Right.
You are always breaking down muscle proteins and synthesizing new ones. To maintain your muscle mass, your rate of protein synthesis must equal your rate of protein breakdown.
Basic math.
Right. And the signal to synthesize protein is heavily mediated by hormones, specifically growth hormone, testosterone, and insulin like growth factor 1 or IGF-1.
The text notes that GH and testosterone are vital for triggering satellite cells, which are the stem cells that sit on the outside of muscle fibers to multiply and repair microtrauma.
Yes. And as we age, the circulating levels of these hormones drop precipitously.
Right, which everyone kind of knows. But what does it actually do to the muscle?
Well, the research indicates that the resulting muscle loss isn't because older adults are breaking down tissue at an accelerated catastrophic rate. It is a synthesis deficit.
Oh, interesting.
The body is breaking down protein at a normal baseline, but the hormonal messengers that tell the cellular machinery to rebuild it simply aren't there in sufficient quantities.
So the repair crew is permanently understaffed.
That's a great way to put it.
So between the nerves dying and the hormonal signals fading, sarcopenia seems like an inevitable downward spiral. But the clinical interventions detailed in your sources completely upend this. The text states that the most effective, accessible treatment to halt and even reverse this decay is progressive resistance training.
But not just any resistance training. And this is where conventional wisdom often fails older populations.
Okay, how so?
Think about it. If an individual has compromised joints, lowered muscle mass, and less precise motor control, the standard societal instinct is to protect them, right?
Yeah, give them a 2-pound dumbbell.
Exactly, give them a 2-ton dumbbell. Let them do seated leg extensions with zero resistance. Let's be safe.
Which, based on the biology we just discussed, is completely counterproductive. Because if you hand someone a lightweight, their nervous system only needs to recruit the slow twitch fibers to move it.
Right.
Those fibers are efficient and they don't require much energy.
And that is the crux of the problem. Your body operates on an energy conservation model known as the size principle of motor unit recruitment. It will always recruit the smallest, weakest, slow-twitch fibers first.
Because it's lazy.
Basically. It will only recruit the powerful, highly metabolically expensive type 2 fast-twitch fibers if the external load demands it. If you only ever lift light weights, those fast-twitch fibers are never activated.
So by trying to be safe and prescribing light weights, we're actively allowing the fast-twitch fibers to atrophy from disuse. We are facilitating the very neurological decay we are trying to prevent.
It's tragic, really. The clinical text brings in the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines to reinforce this. To stimulate those stubborn, fast-twitch fibers, increase motor neuron firing rates, and force an adaptation in that blunted hormonal environment, the load must be heavy.
Heavy. Like how heavy are we talking for a 70-year-old?
They define this as lifting a weight that allows for a maximum of 8 to 12 repetitions before muscular failure.
That is 70 to 80% of a person's 1-rep maximum. That is heavy, strenuous lifting.
It is. The text cites a pivotal 2011 study by Kandau and colleagues. They took a group of men in their 60s and assigned them to a high-intensity resistance protocol. We're talking 3 sets of 10 repetitions, specifically taken to muscular failure 3 days a week.
Wait, they push men in their 60s until their biological machinery literally could not move the weight another inch.
Yes.
What?
And the results challenge everything we assume about the finality of aging. After just 12 weeks of this high-intensity to failure protocol, the researchers compared the muscle size and strength of these older men to healthy, much younger control subjects.
Yeah.
The 12-week protocol was sufficient to completely eliminate the age-related deficits in muscle size and strength.
You're kidding?
No. The targeted mechanical stress essentially forced the older nervous systems and muscle fibers to perform at a youthful baseline.
That drastically changes how we should view exercise for older adults.
Yeah.
It isn't about gentle maintenance. It's about forcing adaptation through high biological demand.
Exactly.
And the text gets even more granular about the type of demand, bringing up a really interesting debate about concentric versus eccentric muscle contractions.
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of the damage. To clarify, a concentric contraction occurs when the muscle shortens under tension. Think of the upward phase of a bicep curl, where the muscle is visibly bunching up. The eccentric phase is the lengthening of the muscle under tension, so slowly lowering that dumbbell back down against the pull of gravity.
And physiologically, the eccentric phase is where the structural damage happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're essentially forcing the microscopic gripping mechanisms within the muscle, the actin and myosin filaments, to violently pull apart while they were trying to hold on.
Yes. That mechanical tearing at the cellular level, particularly at the Z lines anchoring the muscle fibers, causes a cascade of microtrauma.
Which sounds bad, but it's good.
It's necessary. This trauma triggers an immune response. Macrophages rush in to clean up the damaged tissue, which creates localized inflammation, and this is what causes delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS.
Oh, so that's why we get sore. But the text points out that because the aging body has a muted hormonal response, older adults take significantly longer to clear that inflammation and repair the eccentric microtrauma.
Right, the understaffed repair crew.
Exactly. Consequently, many physical therapists and trainers design programs that completely eliminate the eccentric phase for older clients. They use machines where you push the weight out concentrically, and then a mechanism retracts the weight so the user doesn't have to resist it on the way down.
Which seems logical if the goal is strictly to avoid soreness and inflammation. However, the text cites research by Porter from 2001 that investigated the actual efficacy of concentric-only training.
What did they find?
Porter found that while avoiding eccentric loads did reduce soreness, it also completely short-circuited the biological trigger for hypertrophy.
So if you remove the mechanical tearing of the eccentric phase, the muscle literally doesn't grow.
Not at all. In Porter's study, the group performing both concentric and eccentric contractions saw significant increases in strength and neural activation. The group performing concentric-only training saw essentially zero change in strength.
Zero. Wow.
Zero. The microtrauma and the subsequent inflammatory cascade aren't just side effects of a workout. They are the required chemical signaling pathways that tell the satellite cells to fuse to the muscle fiber and make it thicker.
Okay, so if we are aggressively loading these newly rewired muscles and forcing them to failure with heavy eccentric loads, we really have to look at what they're actually attached to.
Yes, the bones.
Because a massive muscular contraction doesn't happen in a vacuum. It puts immense torque and physical shear force on the skeleton. And if the underlying bone density has been compromised, that cure for sarcopenia could literally cause a structural collapse.
It's a very real risk.
This is where the biological math gets highly consequential, leading us to the second major condition in your texts, osteoporosis.
Right, the structural scaffolding of the body. And the prevalence here is just as severe. In the United States, 10 million individuals have clinically diagnosed osteoporosis, which is a severe loss of bone mineral density and structural deterioration of bone tissue.
And another 34 million have osteopenia, which is the precursor state of low bone mass.
Yes, and the mechanical failure of these bones is devastating. The text attributes 1.5 million fractures annually directly to osteoporosis.
1.5 million.
Yeah. That includes 700,000 vertebral fractures, where the spine literally crushes under its own weight, and 300,000 hip fractures.
And a hip fracture in an older adult is rarely just a broken bone. It's often a cascade event.
It absolutely is. The subsequent surgery requires prolonged bed rest. That bed rest rapidly accelerates the sarcopenia we just discussed.
The downward spiral?
Exactly. The loss of muscle mass leads to a loss of metabolic function, increased risk of pneumonia, and severe cardiovascular deconditioning. It is a catastrophic domino effect initiated by weak bone architecture.
To explain how we arrive at that weak architecture, the text provides a highly accurate financial analogy. It frames bone density as a biological bank account.
It perfectly illustrates the life cycle of bone remodeling. From childhood through your late 20s, your body is in an aggressive wealth accumulation phase. The cells responsible for building bone, the osteoblasts, are working far harder than the cells responsible for breaking down bone, the osteoclasts.
Building up the savings.
You are depositing calcium and phosphate into the bone matrix faster than it is being withdrawn.
This builds up to what the text calls your peak bone mass, which you generally hit around age 30. Whatever density you have established by that age is the maximum balance your skeletal bank account will ever hold.
And after that peak, the biological economy shifts. The osteoclasts, the withdrawers, slowly start to outpace the osteoblasts. You begin losing a fraction of a percent of your bone mineral content every year.
Just a natural part of aging.
It is a normal part of aging. But the text highlights that a primary risk factor for osteoporosis in your 60s isn't necessarily an accelerated loss rate. It is having a very low peak bone mass to begin with.
So if you spent your 20s sitting on a couch rather than stressing your skeleton, your bank account is small. You don't have enough saved up to handle the inevitable withdrawals of aging, so you hit the threshold for structural failure much earlier.
And then there are physiological events that drastically accelerate those withdrawals. The text notes that women account for 80% of osteoporosis cases.
80%, that's a huge disparity.
It is directly tied to the onset of menopause and the rapid decline in estrogen production.
What is the actual mechanical relationship between estrogen and bone density, though?
Well, estrogen is a powerful regulatory hormone in the skeletal system. One of its primary functions is to induce apoptosis, cell death, in osteoclasts.
Okay, so it kills off the cells that break down bone.
Right. It essentially keeps the bone-destroying cells in check. Before menopause, women might lose 0.3% of their bone mass annually. But when estrogen levels plummet during menopause, the osteoclasts are no longer regulated. They run rampant, breaking down bone tissue at an alarming rate.
The text notes that postmenopausal bone loss can jump to 2.5 to 3% per year. That is a massive acceleration in withdrawals.
It is a severe structural compromise. And to counteract this, whether the loss is driven by hormones, age, or a low initial peak mass, the biological requirement is the same as it is for muscle: mechanical stress. This brings us to Wolff's Law.
Right. Wolff's Law states that bone in a healthy person will adapt to the loads under which it is placed. But, how does a hard, seemingly inanimate object like a bone actually feel the stress to know it needs to adapt, like it's not a muscle?
It is a fascinating process called mechanotransduction. Bone isn't solid rock. It is a porous matrix filled with fluid and a network of sensory cells called osteocytes.
Okay.
When you place a heavy mechanical load on a bone, like lifting a heavy weight or experiencing the impact of a jump, the bone actually bends and compresses microscopically.
Seriously?
It bends. It bends. And that compression forces the fluid inside the bone matrix to flow. It's like squeezing a wet sponge.
Okay, so that fluid shear stress pushes against the osteocytes.
Yes. The osteocytes sense that fluid movement as a mechanical strain, and in response, they send chemical signals to the osteoblasts, telling them to lay down new bone tissue along the exact lines of stress to reinforce the structure against future loads.
So returning to the text's exercise prescription, this is why the common advice to do low-impact exercises completely fails to improve bone density.
The text specifically singles out aquatic exercises and swimming. They are excellent for cardiovascular health and joint mobility. But because the buoyancy of the water removes the gravitational load and the fluid resistance provides no sharp impact, the bones do not experience any significant compression.
The sponge doesn't get squeezed.
Exactly. The osteocytes do not sense any fluid shear stress, so they send no signal to the osteoblasts. The bone does not adapt.
And the text is incredibly firm on the intensity required. It states, if your client can perform an exercise with 15 repetitions, she is not stressing the muscle enough to encourage bone building. If you can lift it 15 times, the mechanical torque applied by the muscle pulling on the bone simply isn't high enough to trigger mechanotransduction.
And the adaptation is highly site-specific too. Cycling is a heavy exertion activity, right?
Yeah, it's exhausting.
But it is seated and non-impact, meaning the spine and the wrists receive zero mechanical stress. The text dictates that if you want stronger wrists to survive a fall, you must put load through the wrists via push-ups or weight-bearing. If you want to increase the density of the vertebrae to prevent those compression fractures, you have to load the spine vertically with squats or strengthen the musculature pulling directly on the spine, like the rhomboids and latissimus dorsi.
Which leads to a crucial warning in the text regarding spinal exercises. If someone already has weakened osteoporotic vertebrae, the standard regimen of crunches or sit-ups is highly dangerous.
Because of the biomechanics of spinal flexion, when you perform a crunch, you are forcefully curving the spine forward.
Right.
This places immense compressive force on the front portion of the vertebral bodies. If the bone is porous, that concentrated wedge of pressure can literally crush the vertebra, causing the exact compression fracture you are trying to avoid.
Yikes. So what should they do instead?
The text advises focusing on spinal extension and isometric core stabilization instead.
Okay, so we are loading the bones with heavy weight to force adaptation. But the stark reality of osteoporosis is that a fall can be lethal. Before the bones have time to rebuild, we have to prevent the impact. The text dedicates a substantial section to de Barros's 4 approaches to balance and mobility training. And it approaches balance not as a single skill, but as a complex interplay of physics and neuroscience.
Balance is an incredibly fragile neurological loop. Rose's first pillar is center of gravity control. From a physics standpoint, you are an inverted pendulum.
An inverted pendulum, okay.
Yeah, your center of mass is high up in your torso, balanced over a very small base of support, your feet. Center of gravity control is about training the nervous system to understand its limits of stability. How far can you lean forward or laterally before the center of mass moves outside the base of support, initiating a fall?
The exercises here involve lateral weight shifts, intentionally pushing the boundary of that stability to train the proprioceptive sensors in the joints to accurately gauge spatial positioning.
The second pillar, multisensory training, addresses the inputs the brain uses to calculate that position. You rely on 3 systems: your visual system, your vestibular system in the inner ear, which detects acceleration and gravity, and the somatosensory system, which is the tactile feedback from your feet and joints.
And as we age, these sensory inputs often degrade, don't they? Vision gets worse, inner ear fluid dynamics change.
Exactly. Multisensory training involves intentionally removing or confusing one of those inputs to force the brain to cross-train the others. For example, practicing balance with eyes closed forces the nervous system to rely entirely on the vestibular and somatosensory inputs. It builds neurological redundancy.
Oh, that makes sense. The third pillar is postural strategy training, because if the center of gravity does move too far, the body has reflex strategies to recover.
There are 3 main biomechanical strategies. The ankle strategy involves small, subconscious muscular contractions in the lower leg to correct minor sways.
Like when you're just standing in line.
Right. If the sway is larger, the body employs a hip strategy, rapidly bending at the waist to counterbalance. And if the displacement is severe, the nervous system triggers a step strategy, rapidly firing the leg outward to establish a new base of support.
And if we tie this back to sarcopenia, that vital step strategy relies entirely on the explosive type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers.
It all connects.
If you have lost those fibers, the step strategy fails and the fall occurs.
They are deeply interconnected systems, which is why Rose's 4th pillar is gait pattern variations. Walking in a straight line on a flat surface doesn't challenge the nervous system's adaptability.
It's too predictable.
The text prescribes tandem walking, so heel-to-toe sidestepping, and braiding, which is crossing one foot over the other. This forces the brain to continuously calculate novel foot placements and manage a constantly shifting center of gravity.
The text actually synthesizes all of these mechanical and balance requirements into a highly practical osteoporosis circuit training program. It is a 12-minute circuit utilizing 6 stations, resting 30 seconds between each. I want to break down the biomechanics of these stations because it perfectly illustrates how to apply complex physiological stress safely.
It's a great protocol. Station 1 requires the individual to step on and off a 6-inch step for 2 minutes. Mechanically, this forces a continuous weight transfer, training the center of gravity control.
And stepping up concentrically loads the quadriceps and glutes, which pull heavily on the femur and pelvis, providing the localized mechanical stress needed for bone density in the hips.
Exactly. Station 2 is wall push-ups for 1 minute. It applies compressive force through the wrists and arms to combat wrist fractures. But by utilizing a wall instead of the floor, it modulates the gravitational load to a safe threshold for fragile bones.
Station 3 involves step-touch movements with lightly swinging arms. This introduces lateral movement, engaging the hip abductors and adductors, and requiring the multisensory integration to manage the shifting momentum of the swinging arms.
Station 4 is rhythmically doing partial squats, repeatedly touching a chair seat for 1 minute. Again, we are heavily loading the largest muscles in the body to apply torque to the femur, while using the tactile feedback of the chair seat to train the hip postural strategy safely.
Station 5 uses a simple broom. Holding it horizontally against the thighs, the individual raises it in a smooth arc above their head and back down. This requires thoracic extension. It activates the muscles of the upper back, fighting against the excessive forward curvature of the spine kyphosis that often accompanies vertebral bone loss.
And finally, Station 6 is purely functional. Taking a light weight, like a can of soup, from a counter to a chair, then down to the floor, standing back up and reversing it.
Simulating real life.
This forces the body through multiple planes of motion, requiring deep knee flexion, hip hinging, and complex balance transfers, mirroring the exact real-world mechanics where falls most frequently happen.
It's basically a masterclass in applied biomechanics.
Yeah.
But applying this mechanical stress to the muscles and the bones requires a functioning interface. The bones must articulate.
And that brings us to the third major condition detailed in your sources, dealing with the hinges themselves. Osteoarthritis.
The hinges, right.
Osteoarthritis, or OA, is staggering in its impact. The text notes it affects approximately 1 of every 2 adults over the age of 65, and an astounding 85% of those 75 years and older.
85%.
It is the leading cause of mobility impairment, driving massive numbers of total hip and knee replacements. Unlike the systemic bone loss of osteoporosis, OA is a localized degenerative joint disease. To understand the pathology, we have to look closely at the architecture of a healthy joint, specifically the synovial joints like the knee or the hip.
Okay.
The ends of the articulating bones are capped with a tissue called hyaline cartilage.
This cartilage provides a smooth, nearly frictionless gliding surface. But the text describes its degradation in visceral terms. It states the damaged cartilage begins to break down, changing from a pristine surface to a rough network of frayed collagen fibers.
Cartilage is a really unique biological material. It consists primarily of water, specialized proteins called proteoglycans, and a matrix of type 2 collagen fibers, all maintained by cells called chondrocytes.
Okay, that's a lot of biology terms.
Well, think of it this way. The proteoglycans are highly negatively charged, so they repel each other, which allows the cartilage to resist massive compressive forces. It acts as a biological shock absorber.
But when that matrix begins to fray, the friction inside the joint increases exponentially. The cartilage loses its ability to attenuate the shock, and the mechanical force is transferred directly into the underlying bone.
Which leads to the classic physical symptoms. As the cartilage wears away, the bone beneath it, the subchondral bone, experiences abnormal stress. In response, it thickens, becoming sclerotic. The joint margins also begin to form bony outgrowths called osteophytes, or bone spurs.
And the text explains that these bone spurs are actually the body's desperate, misguided attempt to increase the surface area of the joint to better distribute the unabsorbed mechanical load.
That's right.
But in doing so, they restrict mobility and cause massive irritation.
And this generates severe pain. It is important to note that the cartilage itself is aneral. It has no nerve endings.
Wait, really? You can't feel cartilage damage?
You cannot feel cartilage damage directly. The pain originates when the cartilage is worn completely away, exposing the highly innervated underlying bone. It is literally bone grinding on bone.
Ouch. The text mentions a specific, highly common mechanical symptom called crepitus. It is that audible, grating, crinkling sound when the joint is bent.
Crepitus is the physical sound of those roughened, frayed collagen surfaces and bone spurs catching and dragging across each other. It is exacerbated by the inflammatory cascade happening within the joint capsule.
How does that cascade happen?
Well, the capsule is lined with a synovial membrane that produces synovial fluid for lubrication. As the cartilage degrades, microscopic shards of tissue flake off into the synovial fluid.
The text describes it as floating debris causing immense irritation to the synovial lining. The body's response to that irritation is inflammation, causing the joint to swell with excess fluid, leading to pain and reflex muscle spasms as the body tries to forcefully lock the joint down to prevent further grinding.
Given this mechanical reality of frayed surfaces and grinding bone, the intuitive, universally accepted advice is to stop moving. If the hinge is broken, rest it, preserve whatever cartilage remains.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the text presents data that completely shatters that logic, specifically looking at high-impact exercise like running. It cites a pivotal 2008 study by Chakravarti and colleagues tracking long-term runners. The study definitively states that running does not accelerate the development of osteoarthritis among healthy older individuals.
That finding is so counterintuitive that it requires a deep dive into the fluid dynamics of cartilage. How can a lifetime of high-impact loading not destroy the joint? The answer lies in how cartilage receives its nutrition.
Cartilage is vascular, right? It has no blood supply.
Exactly. So how do the chondrocytes get the nutrients they need to repair the collagen matrix, and how do they expel waste? They rely entirely on the mechanical pumping action of movement.
The pumping action.
Yes. Synovial fluid behaves somewhat like a non-Newtonian fluid. When the joint is at rest, the fluid is viscous, sitting in the joint space. When you take a step, the compressive force literally squeezes the fluid and waste products out of the spongy cartilage matrix.
And when you lift your foot, removing the weight, the cartilage decompresses and acts like a vacuum, sucking fresh, nutrient-rich synovial fluid back into its matrix.
That cyclical compression and decompression is the only way that tissue eats.
Wow.
The text illustrates this via a U-shaped risk curve. On the far left, you have sedentary, inactive individuals. Their risk of developing OA is incredibly high because without that mechanical pumping action, the cartilage starves. It dries out, becomes brittle, and the chondrocytes die.
So by doing nothing to protect the joint, you are biologically suffocating it.
Yes. As you move to the right on the U-curve into moderate, regular physical activity like recreational running, the risk drops dramatically to form the trough of the U. This is the optimal intensity zone.
The sweet spot.
The cartilage is receiving optimal fluid exchange, and the muscles surrounding the joint are strengthening, allowing them to absorb more of the impact force before it even reaches the cartilage.
And the risk only spikes again on the far right of the curve, representing very high-intensity, extreme competitive sports or heavy physical labor, where the sheer volume of mechanical shear force finally outpaces the chondrocyte's ability to repair the matrix.
So, motion is quite literally lotion for the joint. But if a listener already has advanced osteoarthritis, how do they engage in this necessary movement without triggering a massive inflammatory response from the existing bone-on-bone friction?
The text outlines very specific exercise guidelines to navigate this. The first is cross-training. Since OA is localized, you manage the accumulated load. If your knee cartilage is compromised, you don't aggressively walk every single day. You intersperse it with cycling or swimming activities that provide a different vector of mechanical stress, or utilize different joints entirely, allowing the inflamed knee time to clear the synovial debris.
Another vital clinical technique mentioned is the use of isometric contractions for resistance training.
We discussed concentric and eccentric movements earlier, where the joint is moving. An isometric contraction is when the muscle fires at maximum tension, but the joint angle does not change. You're pushing against an immovable object.
The text provides the example of a straight leg raise to strengthen the quadriceps. For an arthritic knee, the physical bending of the joint underload is what causes the painful friction.
Right.
With a straight leg raise, the knee joint is locked in a neutral extended position. The individual lifts the leg, forcing the quadriceps muscle to fire intensely, building the strength needed to act as a shock absorber. But because the joint isn't articulating, there is no mechanical grinding of the damaged cartilage.
You are upgrading the biological shock absorbers without grinding the gears. It is a brilliant biomechanical workaround.
It is absolutely essential because the text notes that profound muscular weakness is a universal finding in OA patients, usually due to pain avoidance. Rebuilding that localized strength is the primary driver in reducing activity-related symptoms.
Okay, so we've covered the engines, the muscles, and sarcopenia. We've covered the frame, the bones and osteoporosis, and we've covered the hinges, the joints, and osteoarthritis. But the final section of your provided text addresses the biological glue holding all of this together.
Connective tissue.
Yes. It points out that older adults are most frequently derailed from their fitness routines, not by massive fractures, but by nagging soft tissue injuries, tendinitis, ligament sprains, and muscle pulls.
The text dedicates significant time to connective tissue changes because it is the second most common barrier to physical activity in older demographics. And to understand why a 65-year-old is so much more prone to tearing a tendon than a 25-year-old, we have to look at the cellular changes in the extracellular matrix, primarily involving hydration and collagen cross-linking.
When we say hydration here, the text makes it clear we aren't talking about drinking 8 glasses of water a day. We are talking about bound water at a molecular level.
Connective tissues, ligaments tying bone to bone, tendons tying muscle to bone, and joint capsules rely heavily on glycosaminoglycans, or J-gills. These are specialized molecules that bind water within the tissue, giving it elasticity and viscoelastic properties. As we age, the cells that manufacture these tissues, the fibroblasts, become senescent. They become sluggish.
They stop producing as many GAGs, meaning the tissue physically loses its bound water content. It basically dries out.
Simultaneously, the collagen fibers that provide the tensile strength undergo excessive cross-linking. Over decades, metabolic byproducts, including advanced glycation end products, essentially glue the adjacent collagen fibers together.
So the tissue is both dehydrated and excessively glued together.
The biomechanical result is a severe loss of elasticity and an increase in stiffness. In physics terms, the tendon has a dramatically lowered failure threshold. It can no longer stretch and absorb sudden kinetic energy. A rapid, jerky movement that a young, highly elastic tendon would just bounce back from will cause the older, stiffer tendon to snap.
And when that failure occurs, the biological reality of recovery is stark. The text cites foundational research by Jones and Rose from 2005 on healing timelines. Because of the sluggish fibroblasts and reduced localized blood supply, a soft tissue injury in an individual over the age of 60 takes twice as long to heal as it would in a younger adult.
A mild sprain requiring 2 weeks of rest for a 30-year-old forces a month of rest for a 65-year-old. But the data for the older demographic is even more severe. For individuals over the age of 75, that exact same tissue damage takes 3 times as long to heal.
A 6-week recovery protocol stretches into nearly 5 months.
Yeah.
And in those 5 months of forced inactivity, the detraining effect is catastrophic. Based on everything we've discussed today, the fast twitch fibers atrophy, the bone density drops due to lack of mechanotransduction, and the cartilage starves. An Achilles tendon tweak can literally initiate a systemic decline.
Because the stakes are so high, the text critically examines how we manage pain to prevent these injuries from happening in the first place, specifically targeting the widespread use of NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, Advil, or Celebrex.
Culturally, taking an NSAID before a workout to dull a nagging ache is incredibly common.
The text outlines the systemic risks of chronic NSAID use, primarily gastrointestinal toxicity, including peptic ulcers and internal bleeding, as well as exacerbating underlying hypertension.
But the most immediate danger is biomechanical, right?
Yes. NSAIDs work by inhibiting the COX enzymes, which produce prostaglandins, the chemicals that promote inflammation and pain.
Pain is not a mistake. It is a highly calibrated biological alarm system. It tells the brain that the tissue is approaching its structural failure threshold.
If you chemically sever that alarm system with ibuprofen before exercising, you are operating blindly. The older, stiffer tendon is still experiencing microtrauma. It is still approaching failure, but you cannot feel the warning. You push right past the limit and cause a massive tear. You have masked the symptom while exacerbating the cause.
As a physiological alternative to masking pain, the text discusses utilizing substances that actually support the structural integrity of the tissue, specifically glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate.
These are naturally occurring structural components of cartilage and connective tissue. The text notes that supplementing these building blocks has been shown in clinical literature to provide elasticity and resiliency to the cartilage matrix.
So they actually build the tissue.
Right. Rather than inhibiting a chemical pain pathway, they supply the raw materials the sluggish fibroblasts and chondrocytes need to maintain the tissue's viscoelastic properties, offering pain relief with significantly fewer adverse effects.
But regardless of supplementation, older adults engaging in physical activity are going to experience discomfort. This raises an important question: how do you know the difference? The text provides a vital framework for differentiating between biological adaptation and structural damage, the distinction between okay pain and bad pain.
Okay pain is the necessary byproduct of mechanotransduction and muscle damage we discussed earlier. It typically develops 24 to 48 hours after introducing a new stimulus or heavier load. It is muscular in nature, an aching sensation, and it is transient, fading after a few days as the inflammation clears and the tissue remodels.
It is the feeling of the biological bank account growing. Bad pain, on the other hand, is sharp and localized directly within a joint space or along a specific tendon path.
Bad pain indicates that the mechanical load exceeded the tissue's tensile strength, resulting in structural overload. The text is unambiguous. If the pain restricts normal range of motion or compromises activities of daily living, if you cannot raise your arm to reach a shelf because of sharp shoulder pain, you must immediately cease the inciting activity. The alarm is sounding.
And as a final preventative measure for soft tissue, the text lists a series of rigid precautions regarding stretching. Given that older tissue is drier and prone to failure, how you stretch is just as important as how you lift.
The foremost precaution is avoiding ballistic or bouncing stretches.
From a neurological standpoint, why is bouncing so dangerous for a stiff tendon?
It triggers a protective mechanism called the myotatic reflex. Embedded within your muscle fibers are sensors called muscle spindles. They monitor the speed and magnitude of a stretch.
Right.
If you bounce forcefully into a stretch, the muscle spindle detects a rapid, dangerous change in length. To prevent the muscle from tearing, it sends a reflex signal to the spinal cord, which instantly fires a command back to the muscle to aggressively contract.
So you are applying extreme mechanical force to lengthen a muscle, and the nervous system is simultaneously firing a massive contraction to shorten it.
Exactly.
The tendon caught in the middle experiences immense shear force.
And in an older, less elastic tendon, that shear force will easily exceed the failure threshold, causing a rupture. The stretch must be slow and sustained to bypass the muscle spindle reflex.
The text also emphasizes avoiding stretching any tissue that is currently swollen. Swelling means the tissue is engorged with interstitial fluid. It is already stretched to its maximum capacity from the inside out. Applying external mechanical stretch will simply tear the inflamed fibers.
Furthermore, they highlight the danger of excessive spinal flexion during stretching, such as aggressive toe touches, which circles back to our osteoporosis discussion.
Because of the compression fractures.
Right. The deep forward bend places a crushing wedge force on the anterior vertebral bodies, risking compression fractures and compromised bone. Every intervention must respect the holistic reality of the aging system.
Which brings us to the profound summary provided in the final pages of your sources. Through all the complex biology of motor unit remodeling, mechanotransduction, and synovial fluid dynamics, the overarching theme is radically simple. The text states, while it was once thought that the body would wear out with activity, and that lower physical capacity was a natural accompaniment of aging, it's now recognized that activity will add years to life and life to years.
We are not static machines destined to rust. The clinical evidence dictates that we are highly adaptable biological organisms that literally wither and decay from a lack of mechanical signaling.
Yeah, if you remove the heavy loads, the fast-twitch nerves die.
If you remove the physical impact, the bones dissolve.
And if you stop moving the joints, the cartilage starves.
It's all connected.
If you take nothing else away from this deep dive into these clinical texts, let it be an audit of your own physical routine through the FITT principles: frequency, intensity, time, and type. Look critically at the intensity. Are you actually applying enough mechanical torque to convince your osteocytes to send the signal to build bone? Are you demanding enough of your nervous system to keep those explosive, fast-twitch fibers alive?
Or are you adhering to the dangerous societal myth of taking it easy? A 2-pound dumbbell and a slow walk may check a box mentally, but physiologically, it fails to provide the high-threshold biological stimulus your body desperately requires to maintain its structural integrity.
It fundamentally changes how we view the physical reality of aging. And based on all the biomechanical mechanisms we've unpacked today, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider. It is not explicitly written in the clinical pages you sent over, but it is the undeniable consequence of the science.
Let's hear it.
If our bones, our muscles, our cartilage, and our connective tissues biologically require mechanical stress, heavy gravitational loads, and physical friction just to signal their own survival, how is our modern, relentless pursuit of ultimate comfort, the soft, ergonomic chairs that require zero postural strategy, the elevators that eliminate concentric loading, the automated systems that remove all physical friction from daily life, actually tricking our biology into premature decay? Are we quite literally resting ourselves to death?